Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Albums Only podcast. My name is Alan Beavers. Alongside me, as always, Jacob Slater. And this week, we're going to do an album that I supremely enjoyed upon your recommendation, Jacob, Prince's Dirty Mind.
Yeah, that's right. Really an album that I think a lot of people say, or the general consensus is that this is the album where Prince starts to be Prince.
Yeah.
Where you really kind of get a sense for him as an artist. Released in 1980. And not only is this a good album, I think it kind of fits in with this beginning trio of albums that we started to do to start off the podcast. Prince is, much like Miles Davis and David Bowie, was a very adventurous and a diverse musician. And I think a very kind of diverse artist as well. I mean, he was an actor, he produced films, he got other bands their start. Of course, the biggest one I can think of is Morris Day and the Time. I mean, he was a very interesting figure, much like David Bowie and Miles Davis was. And unfortunately, he also passed away recently. In fact, I believe he passed away less than a week after David Bowie passed, which was a huge blow to me, because I had already had so much love and respect for David Bowie. To also lose another person that I had a lot of love and respect for was a very hard blow. But have you listened to that much Prince, Peeves?
Not really. I mean, not in sort of the album sense. I mean, this is the Albums Only podcast, and I have to tell you, I'm familiar with sort of the basics of Prince. The 1999s and the Raspberry Berets and the little red Corvettes. And I actually, this is really funny. Prince is one of the first people I actually remember the moment, the very first moment I actually heard a Prince song. This is true, and I actually remember the first time I heard a Bowie song, too, and I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but the first time I heard a Prince song, I was probably 11 or 12, and I was watching VH1, and the Prince song, and when he was, of course, just the symbol, was The Most Beautiful Girl in the World, and that video was playing on VH1, and I was up early one morning, and I heard it, and that is actually the first memory that I have of Prince. So I actually went downstairs and I asked my mom if she had ever heard of someone named Prince. And she goes, "Oh, yeah." And I had no idea. I was very young. So that's the very first memory that I have of Prince. But even then, I knew afterwards, as I got older, I learned Prince was a big deal. But, even though he was a big deal, I didn't realize, the Purple Rain era and just how much of a sex symbol he was and all those other things. So yeah, I'm familiar with Prince, but not so much with the album work up until this point.
I think up until recently, I think Prince was kind of his era, is what you could say. I mean, his best albums were in the 80s, and then during the 90s and 2000s, he kind of fell off, where his kind of contemporaries, most obvious one being Michael Jackson, maintained a large amount of relevancy. And it was only till like the moment culturally that Prince kind of came back was probably the performance of While My Guitar Gently Weeps that he did for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert. That, or the Super Bowl performance, which is also incredibly memorable. But yeah, there was just like a period of time when Prince was kind of off in the background. You didn't really hear about him outside of like Charlie Murphy stories on the Chappelle Show. He was just kind of out there. But his work is still incredible, and it's still incredibly worth digging into.
With that being said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the albums right now. So the first album I'm seeing here for Prince, and again, my familiarity is not too good here, but we have 1978's For You, and then 1979's eponymous release, the self-titled Prince from 1979. But, it's really Dirty Mind in 1980, the third album that we're talking about here, where he really comes into consciousness. Do you have any other things that you'd like to bring up there, or any other aspects of that you'd like to talk about?
When I was first looking into Prince, trying to find a entry point into it, it was always said that his first albums were not as well received. And I can't really say personally if that's the case or not, because I haven't listened to him or had a chance to experience them. But I think a lot of artists kind of struggle sometimes to kind of form what they are going to be. And I think even though his albums weren't commercially or critically acclaimed up until the album we're going to talk about, I think you can still see the signs that Prince is going to be Prince. I mean, his first album, the third track on that album, For You, is called Soft and Wet. So I think you already kind of get an idea that Prince is not going to be a family-friendly kind of performer. He's very kind of raunchy, I guess you could say, very controversial.
He is, but that's really interesting to me, because in my mind, and what I'm familiar with, and this is because of probably VH1 and MTV and watching that when I'm younger and whatnot, is the controversial side. And by the way, his fourth album is, how appropriate, Controversy. But that aspect of Prince, I never really was that aware of. Again, I was used to the hits. I was used to that sort of thing. I was used to Prince as a sex symbol, but never explicitly so, that his lyrics, intimated, from Dirty Mind and other works that he did. Controversy as well has some rather, more lurid things on it. So that's very interesting. That's a very interesting point. In my mind, he never was that. But obviously, I mean, you go back and you look, especially the earlier stuff, and it is, it's not, there aren't double entendres. This is, I'm going to tell you exactly what kind of, nastiness I'm going to do to you. You know what I mean?
Compared to, someone like, obviously his biggest competitor at the time, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was very much a kind of more of a safe sex symbol. He wasn't exuding this machismo, although he did that. He kind of had that. But, Michael Jackson's machismo was like bad, where he's dancing away at gang members and everything, and he's like, that's Michael Jackson's idea of like kind of this cool image, whereas Prince, you never really get the sense that he needs to try to be cool, or that he needs to try to get women to like him, because women just like him because he's Prince, and so he just lays that on the table and he lets people come up to him. And I think that's like one of the major differences between the two hit makers of the 1980s, is this kind of this safe, family-friendly Disney fan kind of pop star in Michael Jackson, and then this too cool for school sex symbol pop star in Prince. I think Dirty Mind is like the moment where Prince is like, all right, I'm not going to be playing around. Like, I'm going to show you exactly how good I can be and how far I'm willing to go to kind of put my music out there.
Right, and then that's a great point. And then again, I feel like Controversy, and again, this is coming from a limited understanding, but Controversy almost seems to me, from the research that I've done, to sort of be like basically like coming right in after Dirty Mind is like a backup to reinforce how good that album was. And then I think we're still going through the discography here. 1982 with the release of 1999. I mean, I think that's the one where he breaks out, right? I mean, maybe not just for fans of music, but in general. I mean, that's where Prince comes into consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, you got songs like Delirious, Little Red Corvette, which is also a sex song, in case you were wondering.
I just presume they all are.
Yeah, there's usually some form of sex in every Prince song, really, unless it's political song, and then a little bit different. But yeah, 1999 was also a huge song. I mean, really, when you think about it, 1980 up until the mid-80s, like every single Prince album was just huge. There's just like so many amazing songs on there, and he's just like pounding them out. And I think a lot of bands hope that they have 4 albums as good as like the 80s run of Prince. Like most bands in total only get 4 albums, to work with. And Prince is just like, all right, I finished with Dirty Mind. Here's another amazing album. Here's another one. And then after 1999, it's like, okay, I'm one of the biggest stars in the world right now. Let's start doing more with it. Let's do films, which is where, you get Purple Rain, 1984. And, I can't tell you, like, when the first time I heard Prince was. It might have been, it's very possible it's very similar to the David Bowie thing, where way back when I was in high school, the first time I ever went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an aunt of mine had brought me like a pamphlet, and the pamphlet had all the, members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame up to that point. And I would just go through every single name on the list, and I would listen to the music, and I would try to get a sense for it. And that's probably the first time I ever became aware of Prince as a musician.
How old were you?
Probably like 15, midway through high school. And the first Prince album I ever bought was Purple Rain by Prince and the Revolution. And to this day, I think the Purple Rain album is not only Prince's best album, I honestly think it's a perfect album. Like, I don't like using terms like perfect when it comes to like subjective things like art, but there is like, it's such a good album, and the songs are so amazingly well crafted. I don't think Prince ever really did any better than Purple Rain. And I don't think a lot of bands ever do as well as Purple Rain. The movie's not that good, but the soundtrack is, I'd say, is like a perfect album. And I don't really say that for many artists. I don't know if David Bowie has what I would call a perfect album, but Prince has a perfect album in Purple Rain.
Yeah, interesting perspective there. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good point. But I mean, Ziggy's probably, probably going to be considered the most close to perfect by the most people. I think, Low and Heroes are difficult because, the A side is pop, the B side is more abstract. But yeah, sorry to get distracted there, but we keep going on with the Prince bandwagon here. We look at, after Purple Rain, which is, I mean, just him at the absolute pinnacle. You come around to Parade, which is music from the motion picture for Under the Cherry Moon, which is highly regarded, has a pretty famous cover as well. 1987's Sign of the Times, and that's a double album. It's a sort of a chaotic double album. I don't have too much experience with it, but another extremely highly well-regarded album. Other albums in there, all the way through 1989's Batman, which is, I mean, very interesting now to go back and think about sort of the interplay between, again, movies and music and Prince being involved there.
After Purple Rain, I think I think the only way you could consider it is kind of a step down because he's reached such a peak. But there's, like, throughout the rest of the 80s, he's put out good material. Around the World in a Day is him exploring, psychedelic power pop music. That was the kind of Paisley underground movement that was getting popular in the late 80s.
That's a great point. I just want to point out, I don't mean to interrupt, but, I mean, this is the kind of run he had. From 84 to 89, 84 Purple Rain, 85 Around the World in a Day, 86 Parade, 87 Sign of the Times, 87 The Black Album, 88 Love Sexy, 89 Batman. That's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing that we've picked Prince because we are dealing with 3 incredibly prolific people. You think about, like, how much time and effort can go into recording an album, and to see someone who puts out an album every year, pretty much. And by all accounts, Prince had hours upon hours of music in his vault that he never released.
Much in common with Michael Jackson.
And so to think that this man is so prolific that he has probably enough material that he never put to record to put out records years and years after he was after he passed on is amazing. And of course, by the time that he did his third and last film, Graffiti Bridge, I think that's the moment in time where you can say that Prince finally started to taper off. There comes a point where I think everybody kind of tapers off. I think he still was putting out interesting stuff, but obviously there was not that kind of same fervor.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, yeah, the star kind of fades in a sense. I mean, from 1990 on, you've got, and he's still prolifically making a bunch of things. I'll just run down some albums really quickly, and feel free to comment however you want to on these. But 1990, Graffiti Bridge; 91, Diamonds and Pearls; 92, the Love Symbol album; 94's Come; 95's Gold Experience; 96's Emancipation. I mean, it just goes on, and there's basically a new release almost every year. There's a little bit of a hiatus from 2010 to 2014, but he was making music up until the end. 2014's Artificial Age, 2015's Hit and Run Phase 1, 2015's Hit and Run Phase 2. So
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, he didn't have a definitive last statement that Bowie had with Black Star, but when you consider that he was releasing albums year after year, he kind of outpaces Bowie in a lot of ways. Even though if his albums aren't really selling well, even if they're he's doing things that you might not really like. Like I think it's Diamond and Pearls where Prince tries to rap. Doesn't really work out as well for him as you'd hope, but he will not give up. Like up until his passing, he just was constantly working. It's incredible, and it really, just talking about all the albums, all this work he done, it actually makes me want to check out his later albums just to see his further evolution, because I'm very familiar with his 80s material, and that's like an entire decade's worth of albums. So now there's like 2 more decades of albums that I can check out now.
And the crazy thing to me about it is too. I mean, we've talked about this before, but we go back to, we've picked for our first 3 podcasts, we've picked David Bowie, Miles Davis, and Prince. The beautiful thing about that is there's so much to listen to from all 3 of those that you have to be super committed to know the ins and outs of everything that they've ever done. So, but you could, and you feel like, although they're all no longer with us, we got to hear a lot of their greatness. That's the lucky thing here.
A great part of the 3 artists that we've chosen is that it's a very good kind of binging material. If you really want to get into an artist or get into music, then we've chosen people where you just have so much stuff that you can check out in so many different kind of directions and styles.
There's a lot there. You're right. There's a lot there. There's a lot to go over. There's a lot that you can become invested in. And like I said, as I said when we did the Bowie podcast, I've listened to basically every Bowie album. I have good knowledge about them, I feel. Unfortunately, I don't feel that way so much about Miles Davis or Prince, but I love their work. I enjoy it. You especially got me interested in Dirty Mind. I wouldn't say that I loved Prince's work before hearing Dirty Mind, but I would say that changed after hearing it. So are we ready? Should we just go ahead and actually go into the album itself?
Yeah, I think we should. I think that's very important. So, yeah, Dirty Mind, Prince's 3rd album. Before that, of course, was For You and the self-titled album released in 1979. Already showing off his work ethic by releasing 2 albums in consecutive years. But Dirty Mind, 1980, really kind of puts Prince on the map. You can see right from the album cover where Prince is going, what he has on his mind. Sexually charged album cover. Just laying it out on the line, letting you know what's going to be about. And the first track is the title track, Dirty Mind, where he tells you exactly what he wants to do. He wants to get you in his daddy's car, and ride you. It's like, well, Like, I paid the money for some Dirty Mind, and I'm getting it right now.
Right. Well, it's like Bowie, like we mentioned before. This is a perfect opener. I mean, it's the title track, duh, but you just sort of, girl, I got a dirty mind, that sort of thing. That's sort of just Prince just laying all the cards out there right in front of you for you, and I think it works well. I like, especially in this song, the first time I heard the song, I have to tell you, I actually find it a little. And again, I mentioned this to you off air, but I found it a little tinny. Like, I found it a little like there's something missing. And maybe it's, modern songs really pump up sort of louder, like, I guess you would say passive synths that make the song sound bigger, more bassy, perhaps. I found this to be a little tinny at first, but it's ridiculously catchy, and it's just a perfect way to start the album. I feel like it's also got sort of like a robo funk kind of Giorgio Moroder disco to it. Like there's like a throbbing beat that just stays with it as well, which sort of draws you in. So it's just a great way to start the album.
And the opening actually kind of reminded me a bit of the Eurythmics, Sweet Dream, just like that kind of dark kind of thump, 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 thump. And you get uplifted into this kind of electro-funk, synth-funk kind of stuff going on, which would become the kind of staple of Prince's sound. And it's very much the sound of the future at the time. Because, funk music has progressed from the kind of progressive, almost progressive rock stylings of Parliament Funkadelic into the kind of synth-based kind of pop funk. It's kind of really showing. I mean, it's very similar to what happened with punk music, which was another kind of 70s-based musical style that it kind of, with the advent of synthesizers, you kind of see a robotization of pop music and kind of the subsequent robotization of other forms of music as it kind of drifts into the pop stratosphere.
Yeah, I also, maybe it's a little crazy. There's a new wave vibe here. I almost got to a sense of Devo just a little bit. There's a little bit of that. I don't know if it's the way the synths sound, the way that everything works together, but it's a much funkier than Devo. But I sort of felt that sort of new wave electro kind of thing going on. I felt a little bit of that there as well. So.
Yeah, just the increasing presence of synthesizers and electronic music onto popular music kind of affected everything at this point. I mean, it just works. It's like a really great song, and it's a very simple song. Like it's saying exactly what it needs to say. It's telling you exactly what you're going to expect in the album.
So we move on to When You Were Mine. This one is a favorite of yours, I believe. It's great. I mean, again, the whole album's great. There's no dud songs here. There's no song you go, like everything's great. And I mean that sincerely. Like, it's all good. This one, I got a weird sort of, again, this is probably the most mainstream kind of pop song. I almost got like a surfer vibe to this. There's something about the way the guitar kind of strums along that there's sort of a surfer rock to it. I don't know. I got just a hint of that.
I really enjoy this song. Usually when I listen to music, like if there's a really good album I'll kind of stick to certain songs. And When You Were Mine is one of the songs for Dirty Mind. I've just enjoyed it as long as I've heard it. It was actually, I believe, part of my very last set list for U92 before I left the station. But I mean, you think you know what you're going to get with Dirty Mind, with this kind of new wave funk stuff going on, and then you have When You Were Mine, which is like this power pop kind of song. Like, it's very kind of reminiscent of, obviously not directly lifted from, but very reminiscent of stuff like from the Beatles and everything. The guitar is brightly, tightly tuned. It's very interesting. I think it kind of showcases a direction that Prince would go into the future, obviously in Around in the World in a Day. So Prince always kind of had this Paisley Underground psychedelic style in mind. I think we kind of get a sense for that with When You Were Mine. Now, I actually kind of like the lyrics in this song as well. It's it's a love song, which is not a very uncommon theme for Prince. But just the way he describes kind of this relationship with this woman that he has, where he's kind of lamenting the fact that he's let this relationship drift apart, and yet he's being drawn to this woman because, she's gone off with this other man. Just like the line, I love the line, "I love you more than I did when you were mine," which is great, but I never was the kind to make a fuss when he was there sleeping in between the two of us.
Right, no, that's a great point. When I looked at the lyrics, when I read the lyrics and I heard the lyrics, I immediately thought, well, this is like, so apparently there was a threesome, and then Prince lost out in the threesome is basically what I got from this.
He, as the protagonist, has accepted that this girl cheats on him. He doesn't really care that she cheats on him. But the fact that she's moved on to another man, and then suddenly he's like, what I could have had. And you were kind of sort of my best friend, which is a very kind of childish way of putting it. The protagonist is like at once very kind of self-centered and childish. And I get this, and then on the other hand, he's like very kind of wistful, kind of very nostalgic.
I can't get over the idea of, you think there's a guy out there somewhere that's like, yeah, I'm in a Prince song, and I'm the guy who got the girl, much to Prince's chagrin. You know what I mean?
I was like, he didn't mind, apparently. She didn't even change the sheets. Throughout this album, and I think throughout a lot of Prince's albums, there's this sexuality, but it's not necessarily, a heteronormative sexuality. It's not like a straight sexuality. His songs kind of view sexuality beyond
norms, especially of the time. And to that point, when we get to Uptown, I have some stuff I want to talk about with Uptown, because that song, the first time I heard it, I literally laughed out loud at work. I had headphones on. I literally laughed out loud. I'm sure people in my cubicle, I'm sure people thought I was crazy. But yeah, I think When You Were Mine, it's an interesting song. I agree with you lyrically, and again, what's widely considered one of the best off the album. The next one, Do It All Night, typical Prince title, typical Prince. But this is just funky as all get out, isn't it?
Just like a Dirty Mind kind of reminded me a bit of the Eurythmics at the beginning. This song kind of reminded me of like Huey Lewis and the News, something like that. It kind of like swings up into like this kind of jaunty beat.
Well, the bass. I mean, the bass and just that funky like wow, like that sort of the typical like, wow bass is just so pronounced here, and it's.
I think that's the official definition. I think. the wow bass.
But yeah, no, it's a great song. And it continues in the same vein. You have sort of like almost a disco-y song in Dirty Mind, and then you go to almost like a straight pop kind of When You Were Mine, and then you've got this really funky kind of, track with Do It All Night. I mean, by this point, Prince is inspired and just unleashing the whole bag of tricks. It's just all out there on the table.
Yeah, it's definitely like the most of its era 80s pop song, where When You Were Mine was kind of the classic pop song. This is like the 80s pop with Jay Giles, and I like the lyrics to this one too. I'm shy, but I want to tell you that I just want to, have sex with you all night.
Right.
I'm excuse me, madam, but I would like to.
I would like to sex you up, basically. Yes, yeah, right.
Like it's another one of these things where it's like this combination of like innocence and like lewdness.
That's Prince, though. I mean, that's, obviously we haven't talked about the Chappelle Show and sort of the famous skit that was done there. But even there, like when Dave Chappelle talks about meeting Prince, that's still on the table. Like that whole idea of like he's shy and soft-spoken, but yet there's something really that pulls you in, that's magnetic and that's sexual at the same time, whether you want it to be or not.
I don't think anyone but Prince could do what the protagonist in Do It All Night does and get away with it. Because I think if Prince like came up to a woman, and just like said, "Hey, I want to do it all night," like anybody else would be like, "Go away." But Prince is like, you know what? Let's do it all night. And that's the thing. Like Prince is just like he gets away with it because there's just this. He has this charisma. And he's like right at the album cover. He's like this is me. So I really like the song, and I really like the kind of image it presents.
So we move on to Got a Broken Heart Again. Anything you want to add on this one?
It's again another kind of like change of pace musically for the album. It's kind of very kind of a bluesy song. And I think like if you view, we've done it with Black Star, and I think we've done it with Bitches Brew. If you look at the album as a whole, Got a Broken Heart Again is kind of like bookends one half of the record.
That is a great way to look at it, yes.
So you kind of like start off with Dirty Mind, and then like you have Got a Broken Heart Again, which is kind of like the end result of Dirty Mind. Like he had all this kind of sexually charged stuff, and then like at the end of the relationship, Prince is kind of like down and out. Like he's lost it all.
I agree with you. You know, another really important thing to remember is, and this is really interesting to me, and this gets in sort of the history of music and music mediums. This was recorded in a time when the preferred way to listen to an album was pretty much was record. That was the biggest selling format at the time. So it's not uncommon for a lot of artists to take an A-side, B-side approach, right? What we see now is the complete album, and if you listen to on a CD, you're going to hear the whole thing from start to finish. But you're going to miss the fact that a lot of albums in the 80s especially, and also in the 70s, but particularly in the 80s as well, they're formatted to be like an A-side, B-side. So it's very much true that Got a Broken Heart Again was the end of the A-side, and Dirty Mind is the opener, and then the beginning of the B-side. You have to manually flip that record. So it's almost like starting a new process, like a new listening process. And that's where Uptown comes into being.
Which was one of my favorite tracks on the record. I know that when we were discussing it a while ago, you mentioned that you really like this song as well. It's very good. It's like one of the tracks on this record that I think is like the most, derives a lot of itself from popular music and especially disco.
You could put this song on any time in history from when it was released on, any time, and people would be like, oh man, what's that? Like, I like this a lot. I mean, I think almost anyone would love Uptown. It's upbeat and funky and party. It's got everything written all over it. And I mean, and it has, I have to say, this is why I love this song so much. Here, again, we're going to talk about the lyrics. I love and laughed out loud because I enjoyed it so much. Prince goes up to a girl and basically says, hey, what's up? And she says, are you gay? And that's, I mean, it's literally right in the lyrics, are you gay? And Prince says, and this is where I laughed out loud, Prince says, in a high-pitched voice, he goes, that took me by surprise. It's like, really? You know what I mean? Like, it's 1980, 1979, and that takes you by surprise a little bit. But it's also, like, he doesn't care. Like, he's just going to be himself, which is what, you know, obviously is sort of one of the great foundations of Prince, and one of the great things that anybody can learn from Prince is just be yourself, man. If you're yourself, who cares what other people think? People will love you. Some people will love you. You'll find an audience. You'll find a niche. But I laughed out loud when I heard that lyric. I couldn't believe Prince doesn't care. He doesn't have shame, you know, or he has very little. And that's great. That's what you need.
It's kind of like a very frank bit of lyrics, and I think that's what Prince does well, is like he's kind of very frank in his intentions and very kind of blunt when he's trying to get a point across. Adds to the song because the entire theme of Uptown is like this idea of freedom, of kind of partying, being able to be what you want to be, you know. It doesn't really matter as to, you know, sexual preferences, obviously. We don't let society tell us how it's supposed to be. Our clothes, our hair, we don't care. It's all about being there. Everybody's going uptown. You know, I think it's a Prince kind of celebrating this, not only this kind of romanticized ideal, I think, of the urban party scene, like that was very popular in New York in the late 70s and early 80s. That's like a very romanticized ideal about kind of what society should be around this time, like this celebration of casting away old ideas and embracing the new.
It's really neat, and it's also, this is the other thing that's crazy to me. You listen to this song, you're hearing a bunch of different instruments, a bunch of different things going on. It's got a really interesting synth that runs throughout it that almost seems weird at first, but it's great. It's very 80s. And here's the kicker. Prince played nearly every instrument on this album. Nearly every sound you hear is Prince, which is nuts. I mean, that's nuts. That's unheard of.
He does that for pretty much every album he's ever done, too.
It's crazy. It's great. It's such great musicianship, and it's not unheard of. I mean, there are other people who have done that, but that's a bit of hyperbole. But for a sort of someone who's in the pop zeitgeist, it's pretty much unheard of.
It's like you said, it's like the start of the B-side, and I think this is like a great song to start up the B-side. It would have been a good song to open up the album.
Well, I think that moves nicely into Head, which I think is pretty explanatory about what that's about.
It's probably the most sexually explicit song on the album. I think the song after Head is pretty much cut and dry, but Head is specifically, he's not pulling any punches.
I don't know how to describe sort of the rhythm to it, but it's almost like, I don't want to say, it's not herky-jerky. Stop and start. There's kind of like, it's rock and roll, but it's sort of like, there's a synth line, there's a very simple synth that sort of runs through it and accentuates it, but it's catchy. I mean, it's so catchy. It's sort of start and stop.
You could like set your watch this song almost. It's very kind of incredibly tightly structured. And this is like one of the songs I always go back to whenever I want to listen to some Prince, because it's just so...
It gets stuck in your head, ironically. But seriously, it does. I mean, it is so catchy. I mean, there are other songs I like more than Head, but it's in my mind. I mean, it'll stay there. It is an earworm.
Man, I think we should talk a little bit about the lyrics. I mean, let's see. I'm going to pull out a juicy one. You know you're good, girl. I think you like to go down. You wouldn't have stopped, but I came on your wedding gown.
There's gotta be great stories here. Like, wouldn't you love to just be able to, like, wouldn't you have been able to, if you could have picked Prince's brain about where these lyrics came from and if they're true or how much of it's true? I mean, the stories would just be incredible.
It's not even like he's hiding it. Like, he's not trying to like use euphemisms. He's not like trying to use metaphors. It's basically like, no, I just jizzed all over you.
Right. That happened.
I think it works because it's such a good song musically that you don't really notice what's being said, which I didn't really notice that line until I actually read the lyrics, and I was like, whoa.
Right.
That
has a way of happening to you when you're listening to Prince. Like, if you don't pay attention, there's a lot of people, I've experienced with a lot of people that, we talk about music. They don't pay a whole lot of attention to the lyrics. And that's probably a good thing for some of the older, more mature audience that Prince garnered in the 80s, that they didn't pay too close attention to some of those lyrics.
You gotta wonder if, like, this song was played on the radio at the time. People just never noticed, like, Prince talking about having sex with a bride. I'm just a virgin. But you're such a hunk, so full of spunk. I'll give you head.
1980 too. I mean, these days, I hate to sound like an old fogey when I say these days the kids. No, but these days, I mean, in 1980, I mean, there was a time when The Simpsons in 1991 was super controversial. Can you imagine in 1980? You know what I mean? That kind of, those kind of lyrics. I can't. It's just.
TV had a problem talking about the president of the United States, like, getting a blowjob. But here Prince is just, like, singing it 20 years before people had heard of Bill Clinton. It's like, hey, blowjobs, am I right? Like, they're pretty good. Like, you ain't talking about Billie Jean here. This is Prince. We talk about blatant sexual activities.
Right. So speaking of blatant sexual activities, he steps it up a notch here, and with Sister, which this is actually probably my favorite song on the album. The reason is because the first thing I thought of when I heard this song is it's clearly about incest. That is obvious. But it reminded me of the Pixies because there's an early song in the Pixies' career in 1986 where they also talk about incest. So that's, obviously this was released before then, but I thought about that, and I also thought about how controversial it was, and how, again, he pulls no punches. But this is a great rock and roll song, and it's straight ahead, like just motors right on, and it's a minute and a half, and it's perfect. I love songs under 2 minutes if they're done properly and correctly. And this just hits it out of the park to me. It's the perfect short song.
You expect from Dirty Mind that this is gonna set the tone musically for the rest of the album, but Prince is just going in several different directions. He goes into disco, he's going into kind of this power pop rock stuff and bluesy stuff on Got a Broken Heart Again, and then after an incredibly well-made funk track with Head, he just pulls out the guitar and just belts one out with Sister. It comes out of left field. Thematically, I think it kind of works because it is the second to last track, where When You Were Mine is the second track total, and they're both kind of the rock songs of their respective halves. But where When You Were Mine is this kind of wistful song, this kind of wannabe romantic song, Sister is also kind of this wannabe romantic song.
It's just not socially accepted nor recommended for anyone.
It's this teenager actually, who apparently has sex with his sister, and then his sister grows cold and throws him out of the house, and he just kind of, I'm going to be sad and blue because I can't. Yeah, it's a controversial subject, but I think, like I said earlier Prince is not a straightforward guy when it comes to sexuality. He's dipped into very different directions on his songs. Later on, he'd write a song like "I Want to Be Your Girlfriend" or "If I Was Your Girlfriend." When people think of Prince, they kind of think of him as this ladies' man, but really he's exploring sexuality in a lot of different ways.
And he's exploring sexuality, but he's also exploring what's acceptable. I mean, this honestly, Sister's where I sort of got even a greater bit of respect for Prince, because to talk about those things, whether they're true or they're not true, or it's just to be edgy, it's still interesting. You're still trying to poke the bear. You're still trying to put yourself out there and do things that a lot of people aren't going to like. And whether it's true or not, whether the story is or the lyrics are, whatever, motivation behind the song is, that's refreshing to me. I mean, that's sort of rock and roll. Rock and roll is controversial. It's not supposed to play better side of society. So
rock and roll and funk music both are very sexually charged genres of music, and I think rock music is so kind of ubiquitous these days that we don't really think about it. But until you get people kind of hitting the hornet's nest, kind of going off into directions that maybe kind of you wouldn't really expect. And some kind of lyrical highlights for this song. Showed me where it's supposed to go. A blowjob doesn't mean blow, so going back to Head. Incest is everything it's said to be. She took a whip to me until I shout, "Oh, motherfucker's just a motherfucker. Can't you understand?"
Yeah, I think that lays it out nicely. I mean, there's no pulling punches with that one. We go after that into Party Up, which reminds me a lot, just the subject matter, of course, Uptown. It's a party song. Kind of ends with sort of a political chant.
I mean, after songs about having sex with his sister and getting blowjobs, it's what does Prince close out Dirty Mind with? An anti-war song, political song. If you look at it as kind of within the structure of Dirty Mind, if you look at the first four songs as one cohesive unit and the last four songs as a cohesive unit, you have Uptown, which starts off this side, which is a very kind of upbeat song celebrating this intellectual and cultural freedom, breaking away from norms. And the songs Head and Sister kind of follow along with that in that they are about kind of controversial sexual subjects. And then you have Party Up, which in the lyrics itself, it mentions revolutionary rock and roll going uptown, baby. So I think there's an intentional move on Prince's part to kind of connect this kind of idealism of uptown with this kind of the idealism of Party Up. Like, I think they're kind of intentional move on Prince's part to kind of link these kind of two songs together. I mean, and it's a very kind of disco-y song as well.
Yeah, I think it closes out the album nicely. And you know, about the album as a whole, this album is 29 minutes and 57 seconds. And I tried to think of an album that's shorter than that, and there's only one that I know well, and that's shorter than that I can list offhand, like an LP, and that's Nick Drake's Pink Moon, which is a great album too, and maybe one day we'll get to that. But for an album that's not quite 30 minutes, it's amazing what all happens in it. It's amazing at how tight it sounds. You don't feel like you're getting the short shrift here. This is great. No one who bought this album was disappointed, other than maybe someone who's fairly conservative there on the sexual
Jerry
front.
Falwell bought this album. He's like, what?
Right. Jerry Falwell was disappointed in all of his many
You're a
children.
huge Prince fan up until Dirty Mind. No one knows this.
Well, I'm sure he was also not very happy with the rest of Prince's work as well. So.
I mean, it's just like a very concise album. I mean, you consider like the origins of rock and roll music. Back in the day, you rarely had songs above 3 minutes in length. A lot of the best songs of that era, stuff from Elvis Presley and stuff, that was like 2 minutes and 30 seconds of song. So I think Prince is is making use of like brevity. He's trying to be succinct, which might have been in part due to kind of the lukewarm reception of his first two albums, that he kind of felt like he had to kind of step up his game. So he kind of cut back, kept it lean, and just like focused on putting out great music.
Well, and obviously it works. So that's Prince's Dirty Mind. I have to tell you, I really enjoyed it. I think almost anyone who listens to that with an open mind will enjoy Dirty Mind.
This album is really, it's not the beginning of Prince, but it is the beginning of Prince's meteoric rise to fame. As an album, it's definitely showcases the best of Prince, and like it really defines Prince musically. And I think unlike Black Star, which was a fantastic album, but maybe a little advanced for newcomers, I think if you want to listen to Prince, I think if you're interested in Prince, Dirty Mind is the route to go to. And then, you're in luck, because every album after that is going to be amazing, and you're going to really enjoy it if you enjoy Dirty Mind, which I did, Beeves did. I think if you listen to it, you'll probably enjoy it too.
Yeah, and I came in somewhat skeptical. I like Prince. I had liked Prince. I had liked Prince's songs, but in the back of my mind I was going, yeah, but what's really so great about Prince, honestly? Like, what's like why is he, Prince of the 80s? And hearing Dirty Mind, actually, it sold me. It made me understand, and I mean that sincerely. So